And we're rolling.
J70 sailors, why don't you gather around? We'll get our panel up here and we'll get started. First off, to start, the race committee will be hoisting the L flag and making an amendment. The offset will be changing to green from yellow, so it'll be a green offset, and the change mark will end up being yellow instead of green. So just that will be happening after this, and so there will be amendments. So it'll be basically, you'll end up like we were at the end of the day today. A couple things also, since I've been heavily involved with the Mixed Plus regattas, if you are a Mixed Plus team, make sure that you're registered that way. And if you don't know what Mixed Plus team is, it means you have 50% or more females on your team. So if you're in that scenario on the water, make sure that you go talk to registration and make sure you're set up correctly. If it's Mixed Plus, it's all girls is Mixed Plus. You just need to be 50% or more females. So we're going to talk a little bit today about what we learned today. If you have any questions, we'll ask you to raise your hands. If people don't know, I'm at Furry Sail 22. We're working on the Porch Series, what we call this, with North Sails, to do debriefs for these regattas, because everyone comes and practices on Fridays, so we want to make it more beneficial by doing practice races and things like that. We had a great turnout today. Still need to work on our starting practice because it's really not that good right now. So for next time, think about that. Practice like you race. So work on being back on the line some. We have Zeke Horowitz from North, Bill Hardesty, who's sailing on 3-ball, and Elisabeth Whitener, who's sailing on Brutus, that are going to be with us to share their knowledge of the racing today. One of the first topics that we want to talk about is how do you know what to look for tuning your rig? Not numbers, but what are some signs that you're gonna look at, what these guys are looking at to know I probably need to make a change to my rig. So I'm gonna start with Zeke on that. So what are you looking for when you want to change your rig?
Sure. I think most of the time I'm a mainsail trimmer, and so I use the overbend, the visual overbend you can see on the main as my first tell, which you create overbend by pulling the backstay on, and then you see those overbend wrinkles are the wrinkles that come out of the clew diagonally up towards the middle of the mast. And so the more backstay you pull on, the more of those wrinkles you're going to see. And I like to live with the backstay line that's in my hand between about 40 and 80% of how much I can be pulling on is my target for how much backstay to be playing through. And if I have to pull on so much backstay that the main is inverted, there's so much overbend that the main is often inverted, that's my first visual sign that I need to go up on the rig. You would also see your leeward shrouds probably doing big loops. Your head stay might look like it's sagging to leeward a little bit too much. But my first visual tell is what the main looks like when I pull to 80% backstay. And if I'm sailing around at 90 or 100% backstay all the time and the main is inverted with those big ugly wrinkles, that's my tell to start going up on the rig tension.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so check. Can you turn it off? Check.
Test. That's it. same thing as a mic drop there, dude?
Test, test.
Don't touch that. Don't touch
All right, don't touch the, don't push any buttons, apparently. All right, Bill Hardesty here with Jack Franco on the 3-ball. And how do you know when to, it's a question that always comes up. Well, how do you know when to tighten the rig? And essentially it's a bit of a feel thing, as we all know, and then we create sort of the tuning matrix. But if you're sailing along and you have the backstay on, and like Zeke says, you have the overbend wrinkles and the headstay is still soft, you got to kind of start to get an eye for like how soft is the headstay, how bouncy is that headstay up there in the front. If the headstay is still soft, you got to start tightening it up, and as you get to the tighter end of the backstay, you got to start thinking of tightening that up. The other thing that I like to think of is when you get to the other end of the spectrum, when it gets lighter, and you ease the backstay. If you're at the end of the backstay ease, and that's sort of still not enough power, well then that's your cue to ease it up. And you got to do, in the J70 you can't change during the race, so you got to do a lot of sailing before the race, make sure everything's right. And essentially it's how much backstay do you have and how tight is that leeward shroud. When I'm easing the backstay through my range, at the loose end of the backstay I want that leeward shroud to be tight. And that leeward shroud being tight keeps the headstay from going too soft at the loose backstay. So again, and you ease the backstay, the leeward shroud should go tight. If you ease the backstay and leeward shroud is still loose, it's probably not tight enough on your rig tune. And if you pull the backstay on, the leeward shroud's still tight, or the leeward shroud's tight all the time, it's probably just a little tight. But again, it's probably better tight than loose nowadays with how much in-hauling we're doing. So when in doubt, just tighten it up.
I look at my tactician. That's what I do. But I will say, with a lot of stuff going on as a bow person, especially on a team of 5, it's kind of important to maybe just mention it every once in a while, just to make sure that, while we're all focusing on the breeze or other things going on, that, if we feel like something's not quite right, just offer that as a suggestion.
I have one thing to add, if you don't mind. Absolutely.
See if I can turn this off for Bill again. One thing, Bill made a really good point. You have to do a lot of sailing pre-start, and it's, we've all talked about going out and doing your homework, which is often lining up with other boats and making sure you're getting the top gear out of your speed pre-race. But don't forget that sailing by yourself or with a tuning partner pre-race is much different than rounding the leeward mark with 40 other J70s, or coming off the starting line in 60 boat fleets and having to tack and duck. And you might want to err on a slightly looser rig if you plan to be sailing around in the blob, which I think all of us probably will at some point. So, I think on our team we try to err on being a little bit looser rather than being too tight. And it's always important, when you know that the starting sequence is about to come up, take one last look upwind and try to decide, is this the wind we're going to be starting in? Does it look maybe a little bit windier for the start with the breeze coming down, or do you think you're going to be starting in a hole? And make a decision that's going to give you the most options to change gears when you're sailing in a big blob of J70s, which is much different than by yourself pre-race tune-up.
Yeah, these are all really good things. So is everyone understanding? Does anyone have any questions about this? Because these guys have been sailing these boats a long time, and I think one of the things they really pointed out, which is really important, is find yourself a tuning partner. Go out there, plan it. When you go out on the water, you should never go out on your own, because you're not going to know if you're going fast sailing by yourself. So I see one hand. Yeah, Travis. Yeah.
So in lighter air, what do you guys look for in your headstay, and what do you look for in your daily? Because we're all used to in-hauling so much and everything. When it gets light, like that probably changes a little bit. So can you explain what your thought process is in like 4 to 6 knots? How much headstay sag you have?
So the question is, how do you judge your forestay sag? How do you make a decision to change your jib leads for this light air? And as it is a light air forecast, that's going to be important. So what are you looking at with all of this, and how do you compare it?
All right, good question, Travis. I wouldn't say that there is like the perfect scenario, but was something that I remember doing here in particular, because here it gets to be like really light and like drifting light. And I remember sailing here on the Stampede, and Bruno and the guys, they had this technique where as soon as it got really light and we're sitting inboard and like trying to get the boat to heel over a little bit, that was when they would actually ease the rig extreme. And it would be, you know, the leeward shroud loose the whole time, and the lower is really loose, and then the headstay would be soft, and then we would go with no in-haul. And that was sort of good when you're sitting in and heeling over. It gave the boat a little bit more power, and it was good. But then as soon as the wind came up a little bit, that was really bad. So it's like you really had to make sure you did that in the right time. And to get around that, the wind comes up a little bit, you start pulling backstay on, the headstay's still soft, the main starts to get too flat. And so yeah, you got to sort of, you know, it's like you're playing with fire, but you could maybe get a couple good races in that really light stuff. They get desperate out here. I've been here sitting around, all of a sudden we go out, it's like 2 knots, and like, we're going to race. We've all done that if you've been here before, so think about it.
Yeah, I live in fear of getting the rig too loose. I think, you know, first thing is getting comfortable with your rig matrix so that you know what your kind of bottom end of the rig tune is. And we like to stop at down 2 and 2 from our base, otherwise I think it just gets too unstable. As Bill pointed out, even if you get a 5-knot puff, it just gets too unstable and the boat doesn't accelerate if you get too loose too quick. The jib halyard is really important. It's a very useful tool. It kind of simulates adding headstay sag if you ease the jib halyard off quite a lot. I know on the north jib, the first vertical panel, the radial seam just back from the luff is a good gauge. You can just ease the halyard such that you see the horizontal wrinkles go just past that wrinkle. It gives you a nice powerful jib, so that's a visual to look for. And on the jib leads, it's a tricky one. We kind of live in like a realistic hole setting that's only maybe 1.5 to 2 holes towards, you know, the middle of the track. And that's good for any time that you're in-hauling, but as Bill was saying, eventually you can't in-haul anymore. And in my mind, that is when you're struggling to have the top of the jib leach out far enough. Like if you can't get it to go to your middle mark or outer mark or even outside the outer mark, you probably shouldn't be in-hauling anymore. And then we'll shove the lead forward like 4 holes forward from our most forward normal spot. And that's again really when we're starting to get bodies almost trying to hike to leeward to keep the sails full. I think that's about right. And I think the headstay sag is a tricky one to judge. I like to be able to see it move, but not be moving. Like you want to let it go to leeward and kind of stay. And if it's bouncing around a lot, I think that's a sign that you're probably too loose.
Any visuals from the map?
Elizabeth, and I am going to ask you because you are on the bottom, sit on plenty of boats. So when it gets super light, what is your role? What are you doing? How are you communicating? And how are you cat-like around the boat?
I mean, that's the most important kind of time as a bow person. Your body weight is critical, you know, especially downwind. You can't get forward fast enough. Oops, sorry. But it's really important to be really dialed in to exactly what's going on and be patient, but make your movements all very deliberate. Get forward, you know, make sure that you've got the right heel angle. I don't know, for me personally, it's just making sure that I'm keeping my head out of the boat as well and looking for any kind of breeze, any kind of pressure, wherever it is, and communicating back with, you know, my tactician and the trimmers and the driver that, you know, it might be 2 minutes away, but there is something, you know, on the horizon that's coming this way. So, you know, keeping that in mind and the tide and everything else is just keeping that dialogue going, even when you're just sitting there and you're like, I don't see any pressure, there's nothing going on, it's boring, but it's, you know, staying dialed in is really important, being deliberate with your weight, all the good stuff, you know, all the good stuff.
Any other questions on this subject right now? So being out there watching mark roundings and watching sets and douses, the one thing from both this event and we did the Mix Plus last couple weeks ago where we had a lot of new people on the boat, we saw a little bit of a struggle with sets and douses in the order. And so I think, especially while we have Elisabeth here, who's an awesome bow person, can you go over the order of things with the set and a douse in a J70, which is also very similar to a Melgus 24 or any other sport boat?
Yeah. So, first thing is to make sure that you're paying attention. We were talking about this earlier at our debrief, was making sure that the vang on the kind of that offset leg, the vang is in the right place. That's crucial. And then when it comes to the set, especially as a bow person, I do my best to make sure that I get the sail controls. The Cunningham is very important, vang, and then feeding out the tack as much as I can. But I haven't done a ton of J70 sailing, but I did notice today that it's quite easy for the tack to just want to flop over the side on the offset leg. I see some people nodding, y'all know. But keep an eye on that. But I make sure that I get the tack out so that whoever's pulling on that line doesn't have a lot of friction. Feeding the head out is really important, and just kind of making sure that you're kind of following the tapes on the set, making sure it doesn't go up with a big twist or anything wrong. If it does go up with a twist, typically the first thing I do is grab for the leech, grab that red tape, tug on it as hard as you can. That typically pops it out unless it's rolled at the tack, but that's a whole other ballgame. I think, especially somewhere like here, it's really important as a bow person, when you're setting, that you're in the right spot. It's very easy to want to stand in the middle of the boat, but I think for me, I try to be a little more towards leeward, just so I'm in a better spot when the kite fills, to not disrupt kind of the flow of everything. And then, I'm trying to think, kind of the last thing is just furling the jib as quickly as possible. Doing it nicely so you don't ruin your sail, but furling it quickly in light air, really.
Pull up.
I do not pull out. Charlie does.
What's his position?
Mid-bow?
Yeah, 5.
We have 5. So we have bow team, me and Charlie. But yeah, Charlie typically does tack and pull. Twiggy does the halyard. We just try and make it as efficient and quick as possible. If things don't fully come out, sometimes the pole doesn't make it all the way, the whole way out, or the tack line's out, or halyard's not fully there. Deal with it later. Just kind of get the boat going, and then get whoever's free and in the right spot to kind of wing that on. So.
Bill, you want to go over?
Can I add something to that?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Keep stealing this. I love having the mic in my hand so I can drop it. Something that Beth alluded to, which I think is a really good point, was where her body is positioned and where everybody's bodies are, being deliberate with that. And don't forget that the offset leg is a racing leg of the course, and there are huge gains to be made by racing that leg very seriously and not having too many people come off the rail. So I know on our team we're just 4 people, and we send the person who's going to pull the spinnaker up. They come off the rail. The bow person stays on the rail as long as they can, and they'll pull the tack line as the middle person is feeding the tack out, and hopefully the main trimmer and certainly the helmsman are staying on the weather rail as much as you can when it's windy. Because if you send too many people off the rail to do all these tasks, you're going to heel over, you're not going to sail as fast as you could on the offset. That'll turn into somebody overlapping you at the offset, messing up your hoist, or changing your game plan for the run. So just, it's easy to sort of take a break and start thinking about the physical tasks that have to happen in the boat to get the kite up, but just try as hard as you can to race the offset as fast as possible.
Just to add to that, something I forgot. One thing, it's so simple, but it's really effective. I always take the halyard and I pass it back to whoever's actually pulling the kite up. That way they don't have to lean in and scramble around for it. There's a lot going on right there at the mast, so I take it, and that's one of the first jobs I do, is I try to pass it back. Sometimes I forget, but it's a nice thing to do to help people sit where they're supposed to be.
Yeah, I think, and people don't realize how someone like Elisabeth, who's doing bow, a lot of things just kind of happen, but they're not just happening. It makes life a lot easier, because all of a sudden, hey, this halyard's in my hand now. It's much easier to pull it up now. The pole line is now back to the right person. So there's a lot of things that bow person is hugely important for. Bill, I want you to talk about what we talked about earlier, which was who does what, what's the main trimmer do on the set, and why, while probably the biggest guy in the boat, who's probably the trimmer, is hoisting.
Okay, so I've always done it with 4 up, and we approach the windward mark, and typically I will be handing the main sheet at some point on either the bearway or right after the bearway. I'll hand the main sheet to the helmsman. I'm on the main sheet upwind, and most of the time downwind. and then my role is to basically trim the spinnaker and the set. And so I pass the main sheet to the helmsman. I reach down, I make sure that the spinnaker sheet is uncleated in my hand. The windward one is uncleated and ready to run. And then the upwind jib trimmer, who's commonly the downwind spinnaker trimmer, that's the person that's going to be pulling the spinnaker halyard up. And so the bow person will be feeding the tack line, get the tack line to the mark on the offset leg. We need to get him to pass the spinnaker halyard back. That's going to be a good one. I can't wait to tell them that's necessary tomorrow. And then the spinnaker trimmer's pulling the spinnaker halyard. So Robbie's going to be handing the spinnaker halyard back to Alan, and then Alan's going to be pulling that spinnaker halyard while Robbie pulls the pole out. And obviously the spinnaker's going to be going up, and we actually think on our boat it's a little better to delay the pole out if possible, and it helps the spinnaker go up. So we bear away. The helmsman's got to get the good, ideally you can bear away nice and deep with lots of speed, and you can get the spinnaker up, and then you turn up into it, and off you go. And the jib sheet goes out at some point there. I don't know how that happens, but it seems to happen. And I'm on the spinnaker sheet, and then casually, once Alan and everybody else has the rest of the stuff going, he'll grab the spinnaker sheet from me, and I should at that point have it full, eased, and ready to go. Jack's on the main sheet still at this point, and then we'll swap that. I'll take the main sheet, and Alan will be on the spinnaker sheet. Robbie then takes the bang, and all that other stuff, the Cunningham and the cleanup and everything else. I think that's a pretty normal setup with 4.
No, I do. It's normal. It's normal setup with 4, and I think the other thing with 5, you just have an extra person up there. But it's those little things that are hugely important. And I think one of the things you need to realize also is everything has to be happening at once. And so when Elisabeth mentioned the kite can fall in the water, well, if you pull the pole all the way out before you're hoisting, that's going to allow the kite to fall in the water. So if you set your tack line first, then the pole actually coming out as last, then you're not going to have less of a chance of putting it in the water.
Zeke, you were sailing in a new seat today. What was your biggest takeaway, especially as it comes to sets and douses and the fundamental boat handling stuff?
So basically, if those don't know, we have 2 battling bow people here now. And so Zeke's learning from Elisabeth, obviously, and listening hard because he's a bow person this time. And so what have you learned and what's going on now at bow?
I've learned a lot. You get your feet wet often upwind, which is not great for me. There's a lot of parts of the boat I didn't know were there that my shins and knees keep finding. Yeah, that's pretty good. That's the trailer. That was the trailer.
Hey, we're serious here. Come on.
Sorry.
No fun.
I think, what Elisabeth was talking about, you have a lot of control with your body weight, and, it's staying out of the way of things and then going into the right and deliberate places to help the boat maneuver. So I'm trying to think a lot about that, and pre-start maneuvering, if I hear the tactician call for a big down, I'm trying to throw my weight to weather and smash my shin on the weather combing, and then if we're doing an upturn, I'll dive to leeward and hit my knees on the leeward corner. And same for offset, when we round the weather mark, I'm trying to make sure I stay hiking as long as I can and try to pull the tack line out from the high side. And then I will then swivel in and pull the pole out, and I try to put my feet up against the back of the cabin house to get as much leverage as I can, because you only really get one good shot to get the pole out all the way. And I have the vang sort of right near me, and I'm trying to pay a lot of attention to the vang tension, both in the pre-starts and on the downwinds. I think it's often overlooked in the pre-start, if you're looking to kind of kill speed or do a bear away, it's really important to have the vang quite loose so that the whole main can luff and the bow can easily turn down. And conversely, when you want to head up or increase some speed, I'll pull some vang on to help the leech of the main come on and the boat accelerate. So I'm finding all these really small things that can seemingly help the boat maneuver and turn just a little bit easier. One of those is we had some like marginal plane stuff today, and I think the vang trim is really important for that as well. If you ever feel from the rail like you're starting to get too flat, the bow's going down, you can give the vang a little pump, and again, that'll help bring some main in and turn the bow back up. And then if it starts loading up and heeling to leeward, you can ease the vang off and help it